You think families shatter during screaming matches. In reality, they break to the sound of tearing wrapping paper and a grandmother's deliberately averted gaze. I thought I was only shielding my daughter from a toxic woman, but what I unleashed at exactly 6 in the morning on New Year's Day detonated a lie we had clung to for 30 years. Listen closely, because the most ruthless revenge makes no sound until it is already too late. Hello to all the wonderful listeners of Maya Revenge Stories. We want to take a brief moment to express our deepest gratitude for your presence here, but we must share that YouTube has recently disabled our monetization features, leaving us without the necessary budget to keep our operations running. If you find today's story compelling, we politely ask that you consider supporting us with just $1 so we can provide our dedicated staff with the means to cover their daily living expenses and continue crafting these narratives for you. You can easily support us by scanning the QR code currently displayed on your screen or by clicking the donation link located in the video description or the comment section. My name is Yvette Hodges. I am 34 years old, and this is exactly how my family fell apart. The biting chill of the Chicago winter wind whipped around us as my 7-year-old daughter, Harper, and I stood before the towering oak doors of my mother's sprawling suburban estate. Harper's small, mittened hands clutched a slightly dented cardboard pastry box against her chest. Inside was a batch of vanilla bean cupcakes she had spent the entire afternoon baking and frosting with painstaking, messy devotion. Her eyes, wide and shimmering with the pure, uncorrupted hope only a child possesses, reflected the warm, golden light spilling from the mansion's front windows. We stepped inside into a foyer that smelled aggressively of expensive pine and manufactured holiday cheer. My mother, Beatrice, descended the grand staircase draped in tailored cashmere. I nudged Harper forward. Harper lifted the box, her voice piping up over the low hum of classical music playing in the background, offering the homemade gift to her grandmother. Beatrice paused. She looked at the box as if someone had just handed her a bag of garbage. She gave a stiff, dismissive nod, uttering a brief, hollow word of thanks before immediately handing the box off to a passing caterer without a second glance. I felt a familiar, sickening knot tighten in my stomach, but I swallowed it down for Harper's sake. Not even 10 minutes later, the heavy front door swung open again, and the atmosphere in the room shifted entirely. My older sister, Savannah, made her grand entrance. Savannah was the golden child, the perfect daughter with the perfect husband and the perfect, loud, demanding children. The moment they crossed the threshold, Beatrice's face lit up with an incandescent joy that I had never, not once in my entire life, seen directed at me. She rushed forward, wrapping Savannah in a fierce embrace, cooing over her nephew and niece as if they were royalty returning from a long crusade. The contrast was a physical blow, a suffocating reminder of our place in this deeply flawed hierarchy. The evening dragged on, a slow, agonizing crawl of polite chatter and veiled insults. I sat in the corner, nursing a glass of sparkling water, hyper-aware of every glance, every whisper, every deliberate exclusion. I watched the way the rest of the extended family naturally gravitated towards Savannah, drawn by the invisible magnetism of my mother's blatant favoritism. Harper sat quietly beside me, coloring in a small notebook, blissfully unaware of the emotional crossfire tearing through the room. Then, the grandfather clock in the hallway struck 11 at night. It was time for the family gift exchange, a deeply entrenched New Year's Eve tradition in the Beatrice household. The relatives gathered around a towering, glittering pine tree, suffocating under the weight of oversized, elegantly wrapped boxes. The distribution began. It was a chaotic symphony of tearing paper and squeals of delight. Savannah's children ripped into their packages with practiced greed. They unveiled the newest, top-of-the-line touchscreen tablets. They pulled out thick envelopes containing tickets for an exclusive family ski vacation in Aspen. They paraded around with boxes of obscenely expensive designer toys. And Harper sat there. She sat cross-legged on the plush Persian rug, her small hands resting gently in her empty lap. As the pile under the tree dwindled to nothing, the horrifying realization washed over me. There was absolutely nothing for her. Not a single box, not a stocking, nothing. The room fell into an uncomfortable, jagged silence as people finally noticed the glaring omission. All eyes darted between the mountain of luxury goods surrounding Savannah's brats and the empty space around my sweet, quiet daughter. Beatrice stood up, smoothing the front of her designer slacks. She looked directly at me, her eyes flat and reptilian, before projecting her voice so every single aunt, uncle, and cousin could hear her clearly. I decided that this year, I want to teach Harper a lesson in gratitude, Beatrice announced, her tone dripping with a sickeningly sweet, entirely fabricated concern. Because that child already has more than enough, and it is crucial to learn that the world does not revolve around material possessions. The hypocrisy was so thick it was choking me. I was a single mother. I worked 50 hours a week just to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. Harper never asked for anything. She baked cupcakes for a woman who despised us. Savannah's son, clutching his brand new tablet, looked over at Harper and let out a mean, derisive smirk. Harper looked up at me, her lower lip trembling slightly, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. She did not understand. How could she? In the past, the old Yvette would have crumbled. I would have dragged Beatrice into the hallway, crying, begging for an explanation, pleading for her to love us. But in that exact moment, sitting under the oppressive glare of a dozen silent relatives, something inside me snapped completely. The tether of desperate daughterhood severed cleanly. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice. I leaned down, took Harper's small, trembling hand in mine, and kissed her forehead. You are the most precious, wonderful girl in the entire world, and you do not need anything from this room, I whispered into her hair, making sure my voice was steady and absolute. I stood up, pulling her gently to her feet. I retrieved our heavy winter coats from the hall closet. I helped Harper slip her arms into her sleeves, buttoning her coat with meticulous, unhurried precision. Beatrice's face flushed with a sudden, ugly rage at my lack of a breakdown. She marched toward the entryway, her voice shrill and trembling with authority. If you walk out that door right now, Yvette, do not ever expect to come back, she threatened, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. I finished adjusting Harper's scarf. I placed my hand firmly on the heavy brass doorknob. I looked back at my mother, past the stunned, silent faces of my family, and met her furious gaze with a wall of pure, freezing ice. I did not give her the satisfaction of a single word. I opened the door and walked out into the freezing night, leaving them all drowning in the deafening silence of my absolute indifference. Long before the midnight fireworks ever had a chance to light up the sky, the drive back to our small apartment was painted in sudden flashes of neon light. Midnight had struck, and the city skyline was erupting with brilliant bursts of red, gold, and blue fireworks. The booming echoes vibrated through the chassis of my 10-year-old sedan, but they felt miles away. In the rearview mirror, I watched Harper. She was slumped against her seatbelt, exhausted by the emotional toll of the evening, her soft breathing the only sound competing with the tires on the asphalt. I drove with both hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. There were no tears left in my eyes. The blinding, suffocating rage I had felt standing in that mansion had crystallized. It froze into something infinitely more dangerous. A promise, I swore to myself, under the glow of 100 exploding rockets, that this generational cruelty would end tonight. Once we were home, I carried my daughter into her bedroom. I tucked the heavy quilt under her chin, brushed a stray curl from her forehead, and closed the door without making a single sound. I walked straight into my study. I did not bother turning on the main overhead light. The blue glow of my dual monitors was all I needed. During the day, I was the director of data analytics at Etheria Vanguard Solutions. My entire career was built on hunting down anomalies, decrypting labyrinthine financial ecosystems, and finding the raw truth hidden behind walls of corporate obfuscation. Beatrice and Savannah thought I was just a struggling single mother, crunching boring numbers for a paycheck. They fundamentally misunderstood the power of someone who knows exactly how to look at the foundational data of a person's life. I cracked my knuckles, booted up my custom-built terminal, and bypassed my own security firewalls to access my private, encrypted offshore server. 7 months ago, Beatrice had forwarded me a mundane email chain regarding the family's holiday schedule, but she had recklessly left an attachment from her wealth manager buried at the absolute bottom of the thread. It was a partial ledger regarding the estate of my late grandfather. At the time, I had glanced at it and archived it, respecting boundaries I thought still existed. Tonight, those boundaries were extinct. I retrieved the archived file. It was a dense, convoluted spreadsheet detailing the allocations of the primary family trust. I initiated a series of automated scripts to cross-reference the routing numbers against publicly available property tax records, shell company registries, and offshore asset databases. I poured myself a black coffee and let the algorithms do their work. For 2 solid hours, my keyboard clattered in the dark. Then, the first structural crack appeared on my screen. It was a microscopic discrepancy, a series of recurring wire transfers, masked under vague administrative fees, bleeding out of the master account. But this was not just the general family fund. I traced the routing prefix, and my blood turned to ice water. The money was being siphoned directly out of the grandchildren's educational trust. This was a locked, untouchable fund my grandfather had established specifically to guarantee the college tuition and early adulthood stability for every single one of his descendants. Beatrice was not merely playing a petty game of favoritism. She was committing massive financial fraud. I ran the trace all the way to its termination point. The numbers did not lie. They never do. Hundreds of thousands of dollars had been methodically liquidated over the last 4 years. The destination was not an investment portfolio or a charitable foundation. The money was being funneled into 3 separate holding accounts tied directly to Savannah and her husband. I dug deeper into public debt registries and credit lien databases. The flawless, upper-crust illusion of my sister's life disintegrated before my eyes. Savannah and her husband were drowning in catastrophic debt. They had mortgaged their home to the absolute brink, defaulted on multiple high-interest business loans, and were hemorrhaging cash just to maintain their country club memberships, luxury car leases, and designer wardrobes. The sickening reality settled over me. Beatrice was not spoiling Savannah out of pure love. She was actively bailing her golden child out of total financial ruin. And the absolute worst part was the source of the capital, those brand new touchscreen tablets, that exclusive ski vacation in Aspen, the designer clothes ripped open under the pine tree just hours ago. They were all purchased using stolen money. They were bought with the exact funds meant to secure Harper's future. Beatrice had looked my daughter in the eyes, preached about gratitude, and sent her away empty-handed, all while actively robbing her blind. Rationality completely overtook me. I was operating with the cold precision of a surgeon excising a tumor. I compiled every single piece of evidence. I formatted the bank statements highlighting the illicit wire transfers. I attached the original parameters of my grandfather's will, which clearly stated the severe legal penalty for embezzling the trust. I appended the foreclosure warnings and debt collection notices with Savannah's name stamped in bold ink across the top. I organized everything into a flawless, undeniable, chronological master file. I hit print. The laser printer whirred to life, spitting out page after page of undeniable truth. 65 pages in total. Every single stolen cent was accounted for. I collated the documents, sliding them into a sleek, pristine white presentation box to ensure nothing could be physically destroyed and buried. I copied the entire digital archive onto a heavy encrypted silver flash drive and placed it right on top of the paper stack. I sealed the box. I logged onto the portal of a high-end, discreet private courier service that catered specifically to corporate law firms and handled highly sensitive documents. I entered my mother's address. Under the delivery instructions, I paid a 200% premium surcharge to guarantee the exact drop-off time. The box was scheduled to be physically placed into a recipient's hands at exactly 6 o'clock in the morning on January 1st. I leaned back in my chair, watching the confirmation screen glow brightly in the dark room. The trap was set. The evidence was insurmountable, and there was absolutely nowhere left for them to hide. The digital clock on my microwave flipped to exactly 6 o'clock in the morning on January 1st. Miles away, in the affluent suburbs, a sharp, unyielding chime shattered the quiet, post-party haze of my mother's estate. I could perfectly picture the scene. The heavy curtains were still drawn against the early morning frost. Empty champagne flutes littered the marble countertops. Relatives who had stayed in the guest wings were still deeply asleep, nursing the remnants of their extravagant celebrations. Beatrice, wrapped in a silk robe, marched down the grand staircase, irritated by the disruption. She opened the heavy oak door to find a uniformed courier holding a pristine white box. He demanded a physical signature. Groggily, she signed the electronic pad, took the heavy package, and carried it to the massive dining table. The exact second I knew that box was resting in her manicured hands, my finger hovered over my mouse in my dark, quiet kitchen. I had drafted a single, comprehensive email. The recipient list included every single aunt, every uncle, the senior partners of the family law firm, and all 5 independent members of the estate trust board. Attached was the secure, unalterable digital twin of the 65-page dossier inside that white box. The subject line read simply as a notification of trust liquidation and financial fraud. I clicked send. The explosion was instantaneous. It did not start with a scream. It started with a synchronized, mechanical chorus of a dozen smartphones lighting up simultaneously across Beatrice's mansion. I sat at my small kitchen table, wrapped in a thick wool cardigan, pouring my first cup of hot black coffee. Beside my mug, my own phone began to vibrate violently against the wood. The extended family group chat, usually reserved for passive-aggressive holiday photos and forced birthday wishes, turned into a digital war zone. The aunts and uncles who had sat by in cowardly silence just hours earlier, watching my daughter endure public humiliation, were suddenly transformed into rabid wolves. It is amazing how quickly people find their moral compass when their own wallets are threatened. They realized the educational trust was not divided by household. It was a collective pool. Every single dollar Beatrice had siphoned to pay off Savannah's secret debts was a dollar stolen directly from their own children and grandchildren. My phone screen scrolled so fast it was a blur of frantic text. Uncle Richard demanded an immediate forensic audit. Aunt Caroline threatened to call the federal authorities. The veneer of polite society evaporated entirely. Back at the mansion, the physical reality was mirroring the digital chaos. The white box had been torn open. I could imagine the color draining completely from Beatrice's face as she stared at the printed bank statements, the highlighted routing numbers, and the foreclosure notices with Savannah's name stamped in bold red ink. The untouchable matriarch was suddenly backed into a corner she could not manipulate her way out of. The fallout for my perfect sister was immediate and devastating. Savannah and her husband were ripped from their sleep by furious relatives pounding on their guest room door. The family dragged them out into the hallway. The illusion of Savannah's flawless, affluent lifestyle shattered into millions of jagged pieces right there on the Persian rug. She was no longer the golden child. Before the eyes of the entire extended family, she was violently exposed as a total fraud, a desperate parasite who had been secretly living off money stolen from her own nieces and nephews just to maintain a fake country club image. Then, the incoming calls began. My screen flashed with Beatrice's name. I let it ring. She called a second time, then a fifth, then a 10th. She left frantic, breathless voicemails. "Yvette, pick up this phone right now," her voice barked through the automated transcription, desperately trying to maintain her authoritative grip. "You have no idea what you are doing. You are destroying this family over a ridiculous misunderstanding." 10 minutes later, the tone shifted drastically. The commanding matriarch dissolved into a panicked, cornered animal. "Please, Yvette, you have to retract the email," she sobbed into the receiver on her 15th attempt. "Tell the lawyers it was a mistake. Tell them your server was hacked. Savannah is having a panic attack. Everyone is screaming. Please, just answer the phone. I did not answer. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. The rich, bitter taste grounded me. I watched my phone light up with her 20th call. I watched the frantic text messages from Savannah begging for mercy. I felt absolutely nothing for them. No guilt, no pity, and no remorse. I reached out, held down the power button on the side of my device, and swiped to turn it off. The screen faded to black. The vibrations ceased. I sat alone in my quiet kitchen as the sun began to rise on the first day of January, basking in the most glorious, absolute silence I had ever experienced in my entire life. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon on January 1st, the physical embodiment of my sister's ruined life arrived on my front porch. I watched through the security peephole as Savannah frantically pressed the illuminated buzzer of my apartment. The polished, untouchable woman from the night before was entirely gone. Her expensive designer coat was thrown haphazardly over wrinkled clothes. Her hair was a tangled, unbrushed mess, and waterproof mascara stained her cheeks in thick, dark streaks. She looked exactly like what she truly was, a desperate woman drowning in a reality she could no longer manipulate or deny. I unlocked the heavy wooden front door, but left the outer wrought iron security gate firmly locked between us. I stood on my side of the threshold, my arms crossed tightly across my chest, staring at her with absolute, clinical detachment. "Yvette, please, you have to let me in," Savannah sobbed, pressing her tear-stained face against the cold metal bars. "You have to tell them it was a lie. Tell them you forged the financial documents because you were angry about the gifts. You are ruining my entire life. My husband is threatening to file for divorce. We are going to lose the house by the end of the month. It was not my fault. The economy is terrible, and the business loans had variable interest rates. Mom just wanted to help us bridge the gap." Her voice was pathetic, a whining, high-pitched plea that echoed down the quiet hallway of my building. I looked at her, actively searching for even a microscopic trace of genuine remorse, but there was none to be found. She was not sorry for stealing thousands of dollars from her own family. She was only sorry she got caught. "You did not bridge a gap, Savannah," I replied, my voice dangerously calm and entirely flat. "You systematically drained the future of every single child in this family just to maintain a hollow illusion. You drove yourself into catastrophic debt buying luxury sports cars and exclusive country club memberships you could never actually afford." Savannah gripped the iron bars tighter, her knuckles turning bone white under the strain. "I am your sister. We are blood. You cannot do this to me over a stupid pile of presents." "This has absolutely nothing to do with presents," I said, stepping closer to the gate, forcing her to look directly into my eyes. "Last night, you sat by and watched your son maliciously humiliate my daughter. You watched our mother verbally abuse a 7-year-old girl in front of a dozen people. You were perfectly happy to let Harper bear the brunt of Mom's cruelty because it kept the golden spotlight shining directly on you. You let my child suffer just so you could keep clinging to your delusional, upper-class facade. You are a parasite, Savannah. And the host has finally severed the connection." I stepped back, firmly closed the heavy wooden door, and threw the deadbolt with a loud, final click. Her muffled wails from the hallway slowly faded away as she finally realized no amount of crying would ever break down my walls again. With the physical confrontation failed, Beatrice attempted a desperate digital counterattack. Desperation makes narcissists incredibly predictable. By 5 o'clock in the evening, Beatrice published a massive, sprawling post on her primary social media account. It was a masterclass in twisted emotional manipulation. She painted a tragic picture of herself as an aging, loving matriarch under siege. She vaguely alluded to a jealous, unhinged daughter who was trying to tear the family apart out of pure spite over a misunderstood holiday gift exchange. She played the victim flawlessly, hoping to rally the extended family to her defense based on blind sentimentality. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. The psychological tactic backfired with breathtaking speed. In the past, the aunts and uncles would have swarmed the comment section with prayers and unwavering support. Today, The comments were ruthlessly hostile. There was no sympathy, only a unified, aggressive demand for hard financial transparency. Uncle Richard commented directly on the public post, fiercely demanding that Beatrice provide complete, unredacted access to the trust accounts by 8 o'clock the following morning. Aunt Caroline added a swift comment tagging the family attorney, stating clearly that any attempt to move funds overnight would result in an immediate police report. Beatrice had thrown gasoline on a roaring fire she could no longer control, while my mother and sister were trapped in a burning house of their own making, frantically trying to salvage their shattered reputations. I was a world away. I packed a small canvas bag, helped Harper zip up her winter coat, and we drove to the large indoor amusement park on the opposite side of the city. I kept my phone powered off entirely. We spent the entire evening eating blue cotton candy, riding the glowing indoor Ferris wheel, and playing bright arcade games. Harper laughed until her stomach hurt, her eyes bright and completely free of the toxic shadow that had loomed over us for so many years. As I watched my sweet daughter enthusiastically throw wooden rings at glass bottles, I realized the most profound truth of my entire life. The ultimate power in a toxic dynamic is not fighting back. It is not forcing the abusers to admit they are wrong, nor is it begging them to finally love you. True, absolute power is completely depriving them of your presence. They thrive on the reaction, on the chaos, and on the control. By walking away and cutting the cord entirely, I had left them to consume themselves in their own misery. I was no longer a pawn on their board. I was finally truly free. 3 days passed in a tense, expectant silence. I knew the quiet would not last. When a narcissist realizes they have entirely lost their grip on the family structure, they do not simply surrender. They pivot to the most manipulative, underhanded emotional tactics available to regain the narrative. Beatrice was bleeding authority, and she desperately needed a public stage to play the victim. On the morning of January 4th, I dropped Harper off at her elementary school. Instead of driving directly to my office, I parked my sedan in the visitor lot across the street, partially hidden behind a row of winter-barren oak trees. I had calculated her next move with the precision of a data algorithm. I knew she would try to bypass me and go straight for the most vulnerable target. At exactly 8:15, a sleek black town car pulled up to the front curb of the school. The rear door swung open, and Beatrice stepped out into the freezing morning air. She was dressed impeccably in a beige trench coat, looking every inch the grieving, desperate grandmother. She reached into the back seat and dragged out a massive, bright pink teddy bear that was nearly 5 feet tall. It was a grotesque, highly visible prop designed for one single purpose. She intended to march right into the main office, cry in front of the secretaries, and stage a heartbreaking scene about a loving grandmother who was being maliciously kept away from her beloved granddaughter by a cruel, vindictive daughter. She wanted witnesses. She wanted the rumor mill of the school community to spin in her favor. She adjusted her silk scarf, plastered a tragic expression onto her face, and began her march toward the main entrance. What Beatrice did not know was that I had already severed this exact emotional tripwire 2 days prior, before the school even reopened from the holiday break. I had scheduled an emergency meeting with the principal and the head of campus security. I did not offer them vague family drama. I handed them a terrifyingly precise folder. It contained high-resolution photographs of Beatrice, copies of the threatening voicemails transcribed onto official paper, and a legally binding emergency no-contact directive issued by my attorney. I had labeled her clearly as a hostile, erratic individual who was strictly forbidden from coming within 500 feet of my child. I sat in my car, sipping a lukewarm coffee, and watched the trap spring flawlessly. Before Beatrice even reached the first set of double doors, 2 burly campus security officers intercepted her. The head guard, a former police officer who did not tolerate nonsense, stepped squarely in her path, raising a firm hand, even from across the street. I could read the aggressive shift in my mother's posture. She tried to push past them, brandishing the giant pink bear like a shield of righteous innocence. The guard shook his head, pulled a laminated copy of her photograph from his heavy jacket pocket, and pointed directly back toward the street. The performance crumbled instantly. Beatrice's face contorted from fake tragedy into genuine, humiliated outrage. Several parents walking back to their cars paused to stare at the commotion, realizing she was becoming a public spectacle in the worst possible way. Beatrice threw the massive pink bear onto the icy pavement in a fit of absolute fury. She spun around, marched back to her hired car, and slammed the door so hard the sound echoed across the parking lot. The car sped away, leaving the ridiculous stuffed animal lying in a dirty snowbank. My perimeter was completely impenetrable. The final, fatal blow to their fragile alliance came much later that evening. I was in the kitchen washing dishes when my phone began to ring. I checked the caller identification and frowned. It was Leo, Savannah's husband. Since the night of the party, I had grouped him in with my sister, assuming he was a willing accomplice in the theft. I hesitated, then answered the call, pressing the phone to my ear without saying a word. "Yvette, please do not hang up." Leo's voice came through the speaker. He sounded completely broken, his words thick with exhaustion and shock. "I swear to you, I did not know." I leaned against the kitchen counter, listening intently. "I thought Savannah's business ventures were finally paying off," he continued, his breathing heavy and erratic. "She handled all of our private banking. Whenever I asked how we were affording the country club fees or the new cars, she told me she had secured private investor capital. I had absolutely no idea she was colluding with your mother to steal money from the Children's Trust Fund. I read the documents you sent to the family, every single page. It made me physically sick." He paused, taking a ragged breath. The silence on the line was heavy with the weight of a shattered marriage. "I packed my bags yesterday," Leo finally said, his voice hardening with a newfound resolve. "I am filing for divorce first thing tomorrow morning. My lawyer is already drafting the papers. But more importantly, I am legally forcing the immediate sale of the house, the cars, and every single luxury asset we own. I am going to liquidate everything under my legal name to pay back every last cent they stole from the trust. I will not let my own children grow up knowing their parents were thieves." I closed my eyes. This was the ultimate variable I had not anticipated. Yet it was the most devastating tactical strike imaginable. Savannah had always relied on Leo's high income and steady presence to maintain her illusion of perfection. Now, the architect of her lifestyle was not only abandoning her, but he was also actively dismantling the very wealth she had committed fraud to preserve. "Thank you for telling me, Leo," I replied softly, my tone devoid of malice. "Do what you need to do to protect your kids." I ended the call and set the phone down on the cold marble counter. The chessboard was completely cleared. Savannah and Beatrice were now entirely isolated, stripped of their money, their flying monkeys, and their closest allies. They were trapped in a prison constructed entirely of their own lies. I had won the war without ever raising my voice or throwing a single punch. I held total, absolute control, armed only with the blinding, unforgiving light of the naked truth. Exactly 3 weeks after the morning the truth shattered our family, I received a formal request from Beatrice's legal counsel. They asked for a brief, in-person meeting at a neutral location. I chose a quiet, unassuming coffee shop on the far southern edge of the city, miles away from the affluent suburbs she used to rule. When I walked through the glass doors, I almost did not recognize the woman sitting in the dim corner booth. The intimidating, perfectly sculpted matriarch was entirely gone. Beatrice looked incredibly small. She appeared as though she had aged 10 years and 21 days. She wore no makeup to hide the deep lines etching her face, and her posture, once rigid with unearned superiority, was slumped and defeated. The designer clothes were replaced by a plain, oversized gray sweater that seemed to swallow her fragile frame. Her lawyer sat quietly beside her, looking deeply uncomfortable. I slid into the booth across from them. I did not order a drink. I did not offer a greeting. Almost immediately, Beatrice began to cry. I had seen her cry dozens of times before, utilizing tears as a calculated weapon to manipulate a room. But this time, the tears were genuine. Her hands shook violently as she wrapped them around a paper coffee cup. In a broken, raspy voice, She finally confessed the ugly truth that had driven our family into the ground. She admitted that she had never respected Savannah. She poured hundreds of thousands of dollars into my sister's black hole of debt because she was terrified of the silence of an empty house. She knew Savannah was shallow and greedy, but that greed made her easy to control. Beatrice had bought her older daughter's loyalty because she fundamentally believed no one could ever love her organically. Then, she looked at me, her eyes red and swollen. She confessed that her cruelty toward me and her blatant disregard for Harper were born entirely out of a bitter, festering jealousy. I had built a life on my own. I had a demanding career. I paid my own rent, and I raised my daughter with fierce independence. I never asked her for a single dime. My autonomy was a constant, glaring reminder of her own insecurity. She had tried to crush me by ignoring my child, hoping I would eventually break down and crawl back to her for validation. I sat perfectly still, absorbing the weight of a confession I had waited my entire life to hear. The old Yvette would have felt a surge of vindication. I might have cried with her, but sitting there in that quiet cafe, I felt absolutely nothing. There was no joy, no triumph, and certainly no forgiveness. There was only a vast, freezing indifference. The well of my empathy had run completely dry. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out a single, thick manila folder. I placed it squarely on the wooden table between us. Inside was a heavily structured legal settlement, meticulously drafted by my attorney. It demanded the exact calculated reimbursement of Harper's stolen future tuition, down to the final cent, to be paid directly into an untouchable escrow account within 30 days. Beatrice stared at the documents, then reached a trembling hand across the table, desperately trying to grab my fingers. "Yvette, please," she wept, her voice cracking. "I will pay every single penny. Just let me make it right. Let me be a real grandmother to Harper. Let me show you I can change." I pulled my hand back swiftly, as if her skin were made of burning acid. I looked her dead in the eyes, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "I do not want your emotional compensation, and I do not want your apologies," I stated clearly, making sure her lawyer heard every single syllable. "You will sign those papers, and you will return the money you stole from my daughter. And once that transfer is legally verified, you will never see or speak to either of us ever again. You are entirely dead to us." The generational cycle of manipulation and emotional abuse ended right there at that table. I stood up, buttoned my coat, and walked out the door into the freezing winter air. I did not look over my shoulder even once. I left my mother sitting there, drowning in her belated regret, facing the very thing she had spent her entire life running from, a miserable, utterly lonely future. The story of my family's destruction does not end with screaming or fire. It ends on a quiet, unremarkable Tuesday morning. The bright winter sun was streaming generously through the large windows of my small apartment kitchen. Harper was standing on a plastic step stool, giggling uncontrollably as we flipped golden, fluffy pancakes on the hot griddle. The entire room smelled of pure vanilla bean and melted butter. She was safe, she was happy, and she was unconditionally loved. I realized in that beautiful, sunlit moment that the most devastating form of revenge is never about actively destroying the people who hurt you. The ultimate strike, the most powerful thing a person can do, is to simply uproot yourself from their toxic soil. You walk out into the sunlight, you build a beautiful life, and you leave them behind in the dark to quietly rot in the prison of their own lies. To all the amazing listeners of Maya Revenge Stories, thank you so much for staying with me through this journey. I would love to know where you are listening from today, so please let me know in the comments below. If you found my story compelling and want to help our channel survive since YouTube disabled our monetization, please consider supporting us with just $1. You can scan the QR code on your screen or use the donation link located in the video description and the pinned comment. Your $1 helps pay the wonderful staff here so they can feed their families and continue bringing you these incredible stories. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. And please, always remember your own worth.